Point Blank is a crime fiction podcast. It may not be suitable for all listeners. We discuss violence in all its forms. The works we reference may include period slang, which some listeners may find offensive. The hosts also have a tendency to swear.
Episode 38, Blood of the Wicked by Leighton Gage. Hello and welcome to Point Blank. My name is Kurt, and I've got my Speedo on, my Kasasha in hand, and Justin and I are we're down at Copacabana Beach, ready to talk some Brazilian Noir. How are you doing, Justin?
I'm pretty good. My buns are toasting here in this delicious sun, and the cachaça's going down well. So happy to be back talking about Point Blank text. This time Brazilian Noir, which is an interesting subgenre.
Yeah, it sure is, and I am jealous of your Kasasha. I just have a cup of coffee, but how have you mixed up your drink today?
Well, it's a healthy dose of cachaça with some lime juice, just a little bit of stevia for sweetness, some Angostura bitters, and about 6 ice cubes. It's going down quite nicely.
Yes, I have fond memories of Kasasha. One of the first boats I worked on, I flew down to get on the boat in Trinidad, and there was a bunch of Brazilians on the boat, and we were going to do a yard period in Curaçao, and we spent a lot of very hot days doing a lot of strenuous work, and after almost every single day, those Brazilians seemed to have a bottle of Kasasha that they materialized from somewhere. And let me tell you, it was not the more refined stuff that we get here in the U.S. This was some stuff that was rebottled in soda bottles that they had bought at a previous port for like $1 a bottle. So it was some real jet fuel, but boy, it did make those days a little more bearable down there in
Sounds
Curaçao.
exciting and dangerous.
Yes. If it didn't get us a little tipsy, it could have also fueled the boat or something.
Well, cool. What's been going on with you? Any updates from Kurtzlandia?
Not too much here. Winter or grayish weather is definitely descended upon Seattle. We were recently voted the gloomiest city in the country.
Ooh.
Yeah, well, it's accurate. So, especially this time of year. So a lot of time, unfortunately indoors, not doing a whole lot other than sitting in front of a screen or doing some reading, which is good and bad. But that's what's been up. Not too much else going on. How about you?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's winter here, and we've had some surges of wintry weather, big winds, low-grade clouds. We have had rain and even some sleet and snow, but not too much. And today it's sunny, so I really can't complain. It's winter for a couple days in Albuquerque, and then the sun reappears. You don't lose it for long. At the end of October, I put out the 4th issue of the Manzano Mountain Review, which was a literary journal I edit. It's not crime fiction. It's not that. It's more lit stuff, prose and art and poetry. But I've been working on that issue since February, so it was really nice to close the door like it is on any large project. So that felt good, and it created some space in my brain for Point Blank, actually, because I was so consumed with work and the project that I was just exhausted. So I've been writing a lot more this past month for NaNoWriMo, which happens in November, and just feeling like, I'm looking forward to reading in the future, which I have not, frankly, been looking forward to for quite a while. So we got some good stuff to look forward to beyond Brazilian Noir, Mexico Noir, and then returning home from our road trip. I'm excited about putting our feet back down on American soil and digging into some texts that we overlooked in our first 35 episodes. So pretty excited about that.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. And I did want to mention real quick, well, based on what I was saying about doing a lot more sitting around in screen time this time of year, I did pick up 2 new computer games, and I haven't really had a chance to play them yet, but I just did want to mention them. The first one is Disco Elysium, and this is it's a computer role-playing game, but it is definitely a detective game. You play a detective, and I'm going to get a few hours of that in before our next recording session, so I'll give you a little bit more information there. But it is the initial reviews, and I haven't done much with looking at spoilers or anything, but the initial reviews of this one say it is quite good, and I'll let you know a little bit more next episode. The other one is Black Sad, and this is based on the comic book of, which is definitely a noir comic book. It's from Spain originally, I believe, and it's got animals in it, and there's a black cat who plays your hard-boiled detective, and it takes place in the 1950s. And it's not a kid's thing. It's definitely a hard-boiled comic, but this game is set in that universe, and I'm probably gonna look at that one later on. Disco Elysium is the more appealing one to me. But I'll give you a little bit of a review on that next episode.
Cool. I look forward to that. This is the end of the year and also the end of the decade time, so we're getting tons of best of lists for everything. Everybody and their sister is putting out a list. It can be tedious, overwhelming even, but I did find one from Crime Reads, which was pretty cool. I thought it'd be interesting to think about, given what we do here. It was the 10 best crime novels of the last decade. I went through the list to get a sense of which books we've read, what we've discussed, and actually, let me give you a little bit about Crime Reads, what they picked up in terms of the list. They said that there were certain themes that they found, and I want to share that with you. And then I'll give you the list so you have a sense of it. Crime Reads noted that there were certain trends in the past 9 to 10 years that they noted as they went through their probably endless reading. One was that there was a rise of the psychological thriller, where it was shifting away from stranger danger books and more about the danger that lurks at home or in the office. So the people who are going to harm you are more likely to be people you know. Another one is there are fewer cops and pros solving crimes, and that's been traded by more amateurs or Hitchcock-style every people thrust into everyday mysteries, which I love. It's more proletarian, and I agree. Those are the books I actually look for. So that was interesting to note that was an actual theme that they discovered. Third is that traditional mysteries are supposedly back, and they're being read by millennials. So, ... I guess we should be thinking about reviewing one of those one of these days, if there are millennials out there, and I'm sure there are. Lastly, they said crime and mystery books are increasingly global, activist, female, diverse, and hard to pigeonhole by into any subgenre. And if our our noir trip around the world resolved anything in terms of my understanding of what the crime field looks like out there, it is, in fact, this. A lot of the books we read were activist-y. A lot of our main protagonists were female, diverse, interesting plots. Some of them defied typical conventions of the genre. So cool to see this list. Let me read you a few of the books, including a couple that we've run through.
Just before you get to the list, I wanted to react to those trends.
Yeah, what do you think about them?
Yeah, well, these trends, I think, are really what brought me perhaps back into crime fiction, or to get more interested in crime fiction, because this is a lot of the stuff that I like about the genre. I mean, I think this trip around the world that we're doing is a great example of, this genre becoming and more global, more diverse, and that's certainly something I think we're seeing both in bookstores and from readers' interests, that stuff is actually getting on the shelf and being able to be read. So that to me is great. And I do like the idea that it's getting away from the not necessarily the PI per se, but the police procedural. I don't really have a huge interest in that.
Nope, me either.
It's a good thing to see it going into the everyday detective. And I wonder if there's a correlation between that and the idea of that, we can all do all of this research, say, on the internet, and information is more available to us. And that was just a thought that popped into my mind. And the last thing that I wanted to react to was this idea of the perpetrator being closer to home. And I wonder if that is something that we're seeing from, I don't know if this is actually statistically the crime trend, but at least what is publicized in the news is it seems like we're a lot more likely to be, well, frankly, shot by somebody that we know these days than by a random mugger or something like that on the street. And totally. maybe that's a reaction to that or just, maybe that because of the internet again, that these crimes feel closer to home because we're all a little bit more connected than we used to be. So I don't know. I think those are interesting trends. They make a lot of sense to me, and I think they make for interesting fiction. So
just to add to what you were saying, I think not only the internet brings us closer together, it also helps us to share and affirm our stories and our experiences in our realities, and people get supported by each other, going, "Hey, wait a second,
sure.
It isn't a bunch of monsters lurking out beyond the shadows who are attacking us. It's folks, the abusers, the terrorists, the bad guys are people we know, and sociology and psychology and like this is being confirmed in the professions and confirmed by experience. So it's a fun and very exciting time to be involved in crime fiction as a genre, because it seems to be it's way more. It transcends merely a entertaining reading experience. It talks so much about who we are as people and what our societies are like, and it's oftentimes a sort of a advocacy arm for people who are trying to find a voice, and it's cool. And I look forward to seeing what happens in the next 10 years. So I totally agree with so much of what you said.
Yeah, well, what are some of these books that Crime Reads has on their list?
Sure, there's a top 10, and then there's a whole bunch of notables. So let me just go quickly through the top 10 list. We have Claire DeWitt and the City of the Dead by Sarah Gran from 2011. We have Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. We have The Thief by Fuminori Nakamura, which is one of the few that I read, and I really enjoyed that text. There's Night Prayers by Santiago Gamboa, and When She Was Good by Laura Lippman. And in the last episode, I was talking about how I struggled with her first book, Baltimore Blues. It's nice to see her on this top 10 of the decade list. This might be a book I should tackle to try to figure her out and reaffirm her importance. Next up, Dare Me by Megan Abbott. The Man Who Loved Dogs by Leonardo Padura, which is apparently an epic like 600-page doomed like noir story about Trotsky living in Mexico. So interesting. Every Man a Menace by Patrick Hoffman. The Long Drop by Denise Mina. Bluebird by Attica Locke. And then amongst the notables, I tried to sift through it to see if we read any of those books. And I know that My Sister, the Serial Killer by Yinkin Braithwaite is on there. Obviously, we discussed that just recently. And also two of Don Winslow's border books, The Cartel and The Force. So did you read one or both of those, Kurt?
I've read both of the Winslow books. Frankly, I do not understand why there is so much praise for The Force. I didn't like it at all.
Okay.
But now Winslow's other work, the Border Trilogy, is very good. I would highly recommend that. The Force felt forced.
Hey, that's a good tagline there.
I can't say that I've read a ton of what's on this list, but we've certainly touched around a lot of these authors and mentioned some of them on the show. Of course, Megan Abbott, who we both love, is on here multiple times. And Bluebird has been on my shelf for way too long, actually. It's sad that I haven't actually gotten to it. I should really move it higher up in the list, and I think Attica Locke is someone that we should consider focusing on in a future episode.
Well, you do have one long Seattle winter to endure, and of course you'll be on the boat for some of that time. But maybe if you knock that book out and you really love it, we could mark it as a summer selection for Point Blank.
Yeah, for sure. I am gonna try to do that a little bit more in the future. Is try to actually read one of the books before we choose it. Not that we've had that many duds on the show, but just so we kind of know what we're getting into.
We've had a couple, and we don't claim to be experts. We try to play the role of everyday folk and see these things as they come across our paths. But yeah, I mean, obviously our goal is to be a little selective and pick books that best represent certain areas or regions of the genre. Yeah, we've had a couple duds, and I wouldn't call Blood of the Wicked a dud. I would call it a success, but it's there's a caveat involved, and I think that we'll have some interesting conversations about the book we'll be discussing in the next couple episodes.
Sure. Are you ready to move into our discussion of Blood of the Wicked?
Yeah, I'd be happy to go ahead with an intro summary. I do have one, and this is a convoluted book. There are a lot of characters, so if you're ready for me to go, I will dive right in.
I'm tightening up my Speedo as we speak and applying some more sunscreen.
You should make sure you turn around because you gotta evenly
Yes.
balance that suntan.
That's right. I'm just having this image of the two of us hanging out on Copacabana Beach, and that's pretty comical, Justin. I don't
Yeah,
think we would fit in.
that's okay. It doesn't matter. We should do it though. I think if we find our once Bolsonaro gets fucking removed from power, we should go down there to celebrate.
Sounds good.
Blood of the Wicked was published in 2008 by Soho Crime, which is pretty well known by us by now. I've read quite a few books from their canon. This is the first offering in Gage Layton's crime fiction series featuring his main detective, Chief Inspector Mario Silva. It's a violent, politically charged crime thriller set in Brazil's Sao Paulo state. Now, Silva is a federal police officer, and he's based in Sao Paulo. That's where he operates. However, if this book is any indication, he does not limit himself to stories that take place in the city. We barely spend any time in Sao Paulo, which is a massive city, one of the largest in the world. We are actually spending a lot of time in the country in a small town called, it seems like a small town, but it's probably like 1 million people, called Cascatas do Pantal. And Silva is tasked with investigating the assassination of a bishop named Dom Felipe Antunes. His second in command is with him in his investigative quest. His name is Hector Costa, and he's the nephew. And also there's another investigator, Arnaldo Nunes. And also, Silva has a boss in Sao Paulo who he regularly calls and communicates with, although reluctantly, because he seems to have this trepidation about contacting his boss. You know, he's like the mean, sort of tough guy, asshole boss who's going to be disappointed in anything Silva says. And I was thinking about this as I read all these different relationships and the three dudes on the ground. This dynamic reminded me a lot of the Continental Op and his two operative pals in Red Harvest, who are up there in Montana, like trying to, fuck with and solve crime while also like unraveling the various like crime families and groups that are operating up there. So anyway, there was reminiscent of Red Harvest in certain ways, and the one thing I'll say about that is that at least with the Op, he does far more in that book to actually move the plot forward than Silva does in this one. So, caveat one about my love for the book. In terms of the plot, pretty straightforward. A stranger comes to town. His name is Silva, and his two compadres. His goal is to solve the murder of the bishop, and the more people these three dudes interview, the more rocks they overturn, the more perplexing the murder gets. It's hard to figure out who could have caused it because any one of the possible, suspects could have had motive. And we are guided through this unfamiliar world and the possible assassins. Who could it be? Could it be Colonel Ferez, who's the crooked local cop? He runs the battalion. He comes from the military dictatorship and their penchant for torture and authoritative rule. Could it be the local Catholic leadership led by Father Angelo, I believe, who is interested in liberation theology, and liberation theology being a big piece of the puzzle, which was rejected by Rome and was deemed apostasy, and a lot of the folks who are operating within the church still advocate for it and support the working class and the poor in the story, but they're not allowed to be above ground with this belief. So there's these opposing parties within the Catholic Church, and could one or the other have knocked off the bishop to support their viewpoints? There's the Landless Workers League, which is based on the real-life landless workers movement, who are fighting for the rights of, you can guess it, landless workers. Maybe it was the League who knocked off the bishop, who wasn't exactly a leftist. Or it could be the landowners movement, led by wealthy industrialist Orlando Muniz, who owns the vast facendas in the region, big ranches, and has support from corrupt government. And this well-heeled group could very well have staged the assassination to justify repression of the Landless League, or to use it as an excuse, as a, what's the word I'm looking for, as a setup to accuse the League of the crime. So In all this mix, you also have local reporter Diane Pauli, and also a well-known TV journalist who comes in. So you got the media, and they're portrayed by strong women whose fates do not end well in the story. So they tread in dangerous water. They meddle in the affairs of all these competing forces, which are very, very male, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. There's a lot to unpack in this novel, and I think by now you should, reader, have figured that out. If you've read it, you definitely know a lot of characters, a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of bosses, sub-bosses, locals, non-locals. They're all converging, conniving, seeking, dying. At times it was hard to keep up. I regularly lost track of which priest or pastor or boss or bad guy or even investigator I was with. And we'll talk about that later. All in all, Silva is an interesting character who I want to better know. We do get backstory about him. It's clear that he's the protagonist and that going forward in this series, he's going to be the guy. I mean, the name of the book, the subtitle is a Inspector Mario Silva mystery or whatever. So we know he's going to be around for a while. His backstory includes the death of his father, the rape of his mother, his desire for vengeance, and this whole backstory about him trying to find the bad guys who hurt his family. But that doesn't play a center role in this actual plot, which is set in this small town of Cascatas. This is more of a character establishing exercise, I think, and because this is the first book in the series, it's a little bit of a, I don't know, I excuse it, but it does create a little bit of a weirdness in the way that the book is set up. Mostly this is about the corrupt and the righteous, born from the real-life tensions that have defined modern Brazil, which for 20 years in the mid-20th century was a military dictatorship. And yes, their economy got very good as a result of this, but generally economies do well when they're operating by right-wing fascists. So yay, but there's also a lot of real interesting social stuff to unpack, and Gage Layton does do a good job of that in the story. This is about Brazilian social problems. And as the pressure builds around the case, Silva and Costa and the others get close to solving it. The bodies begin to pile up like any good crime fiction piece. There is lots of torture though, lots of rape, very horrific violence at times, that so horrific that it's almost comic. Where you sort of jump the shark a little, I think Leighton does, and goes beyond what is considered believable, even if in the reality of the military dictatorship of Brazil, this kind of torture actually did happen. Sometimes reality can be stranger than fiction. Some of the ultra-violence is a nod to the torture, as I said, but like I said, it feels gratuitous. Overall, my verdict: I did not love the writing, but the plot is solid, and I did like the themes raised in the text. This is another crime book where violence against women is spotlit, but I wouldn't call this an indictment of misogyny. This is an American expat dramatizing Brazil's social problems in the form of a crime novel. This is a story about power, who has it, who doesn't, how those in power will make sure to keep it by any means necessary. I did like the sense of place. There was a lot of Brazil here, and it did feel like I was there. I liked less that Detective Silva didn't have that much to do. He was often off the page, and Hector Costa was interviewing people and talking to folks and solving things. And I wondered why we had so many damn detectives involved. Why don't we just make this a Silva joint, you know? So maybe in future books, he takes center stage. Ultimately, I gave this 3.75 hits. I liked it. I didn't love it. There were things that were awesome. There were things that I didn't quite like. Kurt, what do you think about 3.75?
One slight correction there first, Justin. It's Layton Gage is the not Gage.
What did
Layton.
I say?
You said Gage Layton.
Oh yeah, okay. Layton Gage.
It's a confusing book with a lot of characters at times, so that's understandable. I feel pretty comfortable with your rating of 3.75. I don't usually do the 0.25 increments in my ratings.
Sure.
But I was torn on this one. At times I loved it. At times I was frustrated with it. And I think had there been some slight changes, I would have been very, very comfortable with a 4 rating on this book. Had it not had some elements that it did have, I would have gone to a 3.5 or even possibly a 3. So I think 3.75 is a very a very good rating on this book. And I had to remind myself that in a lot of ways, this is the most, I guess, pulpy novel that we've read in a while.
Yeah. The gratuitous violence and...
Yeah, the gratuitous violence. There's a lot of scenes where, somebody, I mean, not exactly, but somebody basically throws the door open with a gun in hand to move the plot along. And some of the characters, and this is a concern somewhat of mine, is that these characters are essentially cliches. The lieutenant, the corrupt police lieutenant Perez,
Colonel Perez, yeah,
yeah, he could have easily had a mustache that he was twirling, and
absolutely, he was the most bad, the most like platonic ideal of the bad guy in a crime fiction book, yeah.
Yeah, and so some of those elements did take away from the novel, but overall, I do think that Gage did a lot of things in this that I enjoyed. He brought up topics that, I was a little bit familiar with, but I think the average crime fiction reader is probably not that familiar with the landless peasant movement in Brazil. I don't think the average reader knows much about liberation theology, for example, and to see those topics in a crime fiction novel was pretty good. And I also think it's interesting, and I was, at first, when I learned this, I was like, oh, damn, we made a mistake. That Leighton Gage is not Brazilian by birth. He's American. But he did live, he has passed away, but he did live in Brazil for, I believe, 20 years. His second wife is Brazilian by birth. I believe all of his kids have Brazilian citizenship. And so, I mean, it is a country of many immigrants. So for him to be an expat there of that length of time, like, I think that voice is still appropriate for Brazil, and one that perhaps can say some things that might might be a little different than someone who was born in Brazil. I was okay with that after I read this book and looked a little bit at Gage's biography, but initially I thought we had made a mistake with choosing him as our Brazilian author.
Oh, I mean, I get that. I too had that concern, and as I dug deeper into Brazilian Noir for Subject Unknown, which we'll talk about in just a bit, I started to uncover all these titles and names that I knew nothing about, and I was like, oh, this book could have been great. We could have gone here, we could have gone there, but the fact is, we're trying to understand Brazil, and we're trying to understand the way that their fiction has been, crafted over the years, and maybe Gage is a good gateway. It's a good gateway for us. Gives us an insight into that world, and sets us up to review even more deeply if we come back around to Brazil again. There's certainly some authors that we'll talk about that I'm pretty excited about checking out. So,
yeah, for sure. But yeah, this was a good first taste of Brazilian noir. It's not going to be a classic of noir fiction, 20 years from now or anything like that. I did enjoy it. I do think it sets up a nice series. I'm intrigued to try something else in this series. And I do have to give Soho Press credit for that. This is part of their Passport to Crime series, which is kind of a global collection of crime fiction. And one of the things that they do in a lot of these books is they make the first book in the series a little cheaper to get you hooked and to try it out, which, it works. When we look at these first novels, and especially first novels in a series, I think there's always a danger for something like this where the author is essentially trying to make a series or something but they don't know if they're going to get that series just yet. So they feel like they have to throw everything they've got into the book.
Yeah. How can you know, there's a lot of anxiety probably that comes in the crafting.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that comes through in this particular book a little bit, when we'll get into this in the main topic, but the different web that's mixed here. We could have maybe done with one less element to this rather, like you said, at times convoluted story, but it still works. It's still an enjoyable read. And I'm glad we took a look at Blood of the Wicked.
Indeed. And we'll talk more. Obviously, we're going to dive deep into the book in episode 39. But that was just a little taste for those readers who haven't yet finished the book. From here, we're going to move on into Subject Unknown and spend some time trying to understand and figure out what is Brazilian noir? Is it even a thing? So that's where we're going next.
Subject Unknown.
Brazilian noir.
Noir. Well, welcome to Subject Unknown, where we're going to explore Brazilian Noir. Justin and I have retired from the beach. We've put on something that covers a little bit more of our skin than our Speedos. So,
Well, speak for
I guess
yourself, buddy.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought this was going to be a formal dinner, Justin.
I'm entirely in the nude.
Well, okay, it's going to be that kind of party. I guess that's appropriate for parts of Rio fiction. Something that I did find in the in the Brazilian Noir collection is that that there is a little more sex and sexuality, I think, in Brazilian Noir than maybe other places we've looked. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, yeah, what is this Brazilian Noir? Is Brazilian Noir a thing? What do you think, Justin?
It's a thing, but it's also a thing that we've seen before in various incarnations. So it's not entirely its own thing. And what I'll say about that, the part that's truly Brazilian is the interesting medley of problems that have made Brazil, which is a similar medley of problems that has made the United States, because we're both Western hemispheric. We both have a history of slave trade. We both have had a long history of colonialist governments and rule, and we both have a strange fetish for the strong man. So there are those aspects of any highly functioning capitalist nation with class issues. What I found to be parallel to some other things we've discussed is that, like, for example, Tony Bellotto, who's a well-known fiction writer in Brazil. He's sort of famous. He has like a rock band, and he has a well-known series of detective fiction that we have not read, but he's pretty well known there. He actually did the editing for Rio Noir and Sao Paulo Noir for Akashic. So we'll talk about him in that context later on. He, in a podcast interview, was asked to talk about noir in Brazil. He was interviewed by somebody from the DIY MFA podcast. His argument was that noir is about atmosphere, but noir in a place like Rio is challenging because of the sunny thing that goes on there, the beach culture, sort of like us with our bronze buns and tanning ourselves on Ipanema. That kind of thing doesn't fit well with the genre. But I immediately thought about Florida Noir and South Florida Noir and that kind of sunstroke mixed with dark crime, that aspect of the genre. What about the Mediterranean coast? Like, any of these sunny tourist zones can be interpreted through the lens of a chamber of commerce for sure, but all of them without question can also be viewed through the lens of the poor or the underclass or the marginalized. And that's really the trick, how to sort of subvert these reader expectations on these places that are known for festivity and carnival and fun things and escape. And of course, the next step is how to actually evoke that atmosphere, how to turn this good-natured, fun atmosphere into something that's creepy or dangerous or whatever. And it's all about the filtering the atmosphere through the lens of the marginalized. All of a sudden, these sunny places become desperate, dangerous, trash-filled alleys, child prostitutes being stabbed, and assassins saying that, if you tell, they're going to kill your parents. All of a sudden, that sun doesn't really feel the same. It doesn't have the same good energy. It's oppressive and terrifying and sheds light on the hopelessness of these characters. So I thought about that aspect of Brazil and how much it related or reminded me of Florida Noir. I wouldn't say that I know I have Brazil Noir figured out, though he did mention one other thing that reminded me of Florida Noir. It's that there's humor. He incorporates humor, Bellotto, and I saw that in some of the texts I read, the stories I read in the Akashic books. But I don't know, is it enough? Are those things all-encompassing? Is that what Brazil Noir is, or is it something more? What do you think?
I think that's a good question, because I'm a little, again, we're struggling with the fact that there's a lot less of Brazilian crime fiction in translation than there probably should be.
Yes.
And we're only getting a very surface level taste of what Brazilian Noir has to offer. But I was kind of struck with the fact that and I'm going to talk about a book later on that kind of deals with this fact, but there seems to be a struggle within crime fiction writers from Brazil about that they maybe haven't had that great crime writer, or they haven't had that great breakthrough of crime writing in the history of fiction in Brazil. It has a history that is similar to many of the areas that we've covered before, whether that be the US or Europe or Asia or whatever, that crime fiction emerges at about the same time, goes through a similar transition, but it's been a little slower to develop in Brazil. You bring up some interesting points, but in that interview brought up some interesting points, but at the same time, I'm seeing a country from an outside point of view, where this seems like a place that would be perfect for crime fiction, because you have a large, diverse country that has a huge differential between wealth, much like what we saw in Nigeria. You have a complicated political history of both very authoritarian regimes. You have popular social movements going on. You have all of these factors that seem like they would make a good stew for good crime fiction. And there is definitely good crime fiction there, but it seems like it still needs to develop a little bit more. That's what I'm getting from the outside point of view. And I think I saw that. I read both of the Akashic collections that are available, Sao Paulo and Rio. I don't have enough background knowledge to know if these were great choices for authors or not. But one of the things I felt, I didn't dislike these collections, but I didn't love them either. They didn't grab me like the Lagos Noir collection did. In a way, some of these things, they felt a little too predictable. I fell back on some very similar themes of dealing with, if there was going to be crime, there's going to be in the favelas, which are essentially like the shanty town type areas. We're going to deal with drug traffickers. We're going to look at sex workers. And there's nothing wrong with those as topics, but it just felt a little, I don't know, a little stale perhaps. I'm not quite sure what ingredient is missing, or maybe it's just my own lack of ability to read Portuguese, or have come across the right article that gave me the background in Brazilian noir that I really needed for this. I think there's a potential here for an emerging, vibrant crime fiction scene.
I mean, I feel like there certainly should be. Like you said, all the ingredients are there. I mean, as I read deeper into who's been around and who's been writing in Brazil, there are some seemingly terrific authors, or at least authors with potential who I have not read yet, at least in terms of the modern era, most recently, contemporarily. We have like Patricia Mello is a huge name in Brazil, and her books have been translated. You haven't read her, have you?
I've read one of her books, yes.
Okay, cool. I mean, I was... Once I figured out that she was out there and her work was out there, I got really excited about that. There's also Frei Beto, who's a well-known public figure in Brazil. He was persecuted for his political beliefs during the dictatorship. And he's a liberation theologist who sort of switched gears and became a crime writer, put out a book called Hotel Brazil, which I'm curious about. And then there's the guy who Layton Gage gets compared to often as like a competitor, whose name is Luis Alfredo Garcia Rosa, who was an academic before he sort of switched gears and started putting out crime fiction with The Silence of the Rain. And that's a Rio...
And I read that one.
You did read that. Okay. I'll be curious to know what you think on that, because that's a series detective, Espinosa. And that one looked interesting too. And of course, all of these have social problems in the forefront of their themes, which is reminiscent of Mediterranean noir and reminiscent of Swedish noir. All of these places where social problems, where class divides are center stage and help fuel the plot wheels. What did you think of the Garcia Rosa book?
I really enjoyed it. At first, I was slightly disappointed in the beginning. And again, this is the problem of this, kind of where I was going with these series detective books, that sometimes that first novel doesn't always do what you want it to do.
Yeah.
The Silence of the Rain was pretty good. It started out a little bit, maybe predictable would be the right word, but by the second half of the book, I was really drawn into it. I enjoyed it quite a bit. If I was forced to pick a series, I could only read one series, whether I could read Gage or Garcia Rosa, I think I would go with Garcia Rosa.
Okay.
I saw a lot there that I really enjoyed from perhaps more of a literary perspective, where
Sure.
Gage was a little bit more of a punch 'em up.
Yeah.
And you said something, we've seen this before, but I wanted to go back to this idea that they had this dictatorship for so long. And I wonder if some of the stifling of, I mean, obviously a dictatorship usually, well, historically a dictatorship stifles creativity, correct? Right?
Yeah.
pretty strongly.
You got some other things to worry about.
Yes. And of course, it wasn't just a short dictatorship. This was a very long dictatorship. So I think you're gonna stifle the writing creativity for a short time, and there's going to be a period, quite a long period, where that is going to affect people post the dictatorship. So I think maybe we're just starting to see some emergence of a recovery from that period, although, current politics in Brazil might be another problem. But that might have some play on why this crime fiction scene seems a little bit, I don't want to say behind, but it's still cooking. It's still cooking in Brazil, and it's getting there.
Yeah. Because I will say this, in my research, I did come across, Brazil started a little bit later, but the first known Brazilian detective novel was published in 1920. So, I mean,
Yes.
around the same ballpark as a lot of the other places, including the United States, where, the golden age was transitioning to the hard-boiled age. And in the 30s and 40s, there were some domestic writers who were writing police procedurals. And there was a regular detective series with a guy named Dick Peter, which is a weird name for a Brazilian detective, but whatever. And then in the 50s, there was Luis Lopes Coelho published some more police procedurals and in a detective named Dr. Late. So, I mean, I think things were moving, following the same sort of trajectory as a lot of other places where this genre was developing. But then, yeah, like you said, the 1960s, full stop, military dictatorship, silencing, disappearances, killings, suppression of freedom for 20 years until 1985. And 1985 feels like a long time ago, but that's just one generation. And it's very easy for massive trauma like a dictatorship to destroy the creative impulse and desire of one generation to produce fanciful literature. And so, like you said, it could be very well, so long as Bolsonaro doesn't fuck everything up, we could be due for a Brazilian Renaissance.
Which, isn't to say that there wasn't crime fiction being published during that period. And in fact, it wasn't like there was also a complete stranglehold on publishing, because I did get here that, during the 70s and 80s, crime fiction was a means of social protest. And you see that in the Brazilian fiction of a number of writers, where they comment on the authoritarian government, the socioeconomic system, and that they often, maybe more so than other places, turned the genre upside down so that the authorities were the criminals. And this quote here is from a collection called Call a Thief by Monasir Amencino. We're born with the fear of the police, fear of the powerful. There's an eye watching over everything. The agents of the law are everywhere, reading our letters, our loves, our hates. We live in a police state. So you are going to see a lot of social commentary in Brazilian crime fiction, and it's definitely a result of this political history that they have.
Totally. And I came across that as well in the 70s and 80s, because you couldn't be out in the streets. You had to find a way of couching your critiques in something that was, hidden, relatively speaking. And a lot of the subversive criticism was in satiric, parody, farce. But by the 1980s, the quote-unquote Brazilian-style social protest mystery was entrenched. Everybody was sort of doing it. That was the main way of communicating a lot of the concerns of the left and people who were seeking freedom. Question is, does that have staying power? Is it protest tool, or is it the dawning of a literary movement? And I think it's an interesting way of Is it more political or is it more literary or does that make a difference? These are questions I don't have answers to.
I don't have answers necessarily either. However, the fiction that I did look at suggests that it does, that it does have staying power as a literary tradition and a movement within crime fiction, at least in Brazil.
And one other thing I'll add to that is that, which you hinted at or a couple times, is that a lot of the stuff that we read tends to be literary. It seems like a lot of the stories have a literary aspect to them, and that's something that Tony Bellotto mentioned in that noir podcast I listened to. He said when he was tapping folks to write stories for the Akashic series that he edited, he said he drew from a lot of literary novelists more so than crime novelists. Not just because he preferred them, but because there's more literary novelists in Brazil than there are crime novelists. It isn't perhaps as robust of a movement as it is in other places. So I think maybe if it becomes lucrative, it might become a thing where you get more literary folks moving into crime fiction and producing work for mass audiences like ourselves. So we'll see how that goes down the road.
Sure, and we've certainly seen that before.
Yeah, a little bit.
All right. Well, I mean, that's kind of an overview of Brazilian noir. I mean, there's still a ton for us to learn. I think overall here, I've seen a lot of things that are interesting, but not as, like I said earlier, not that development like we've seen, say, in Japan or even Nigeria for that matter. But it certainly seems like it is forming up to be a very interesting place for crime fiction, or perhaps we just need more stuff translated so we can read it.
Translators, get on it.
Moving on to the next segment, which is, I've been toying with the title on this one back and forth, but I'm going to change well-thumbed classics to forgotten classics? ? So the question I'll be answering when I review each one of these books is this a forgotten classic or is it not? So Justin, this time around, I have a book called Carny Kill by Robert Edmund Alter.
Interesting title.
Yeah, I have a soft spot for sort of horror or crime that takes place around the carnival, the circus, amusement parks, all of that sort of thing. I think it makes for if kind of a corny setting, but I'm a sucker for it. So I had to pick up this Carny Kill and take a look. This was originally published in 1966 as a gold medal original. The edition that I read was a reprint from 1986 from Black Lizard Books. First of all, Robert Alter was somewhat of a prolific author. He wrote, this very different from what this book we're looking at today is, but he wrote at least 14 children's books at one point. He wrote 3 adult crime fiction novels, which include Swamp Sister, The Red Phantom, and Carny Kill. And he also wrote a science fiction novel, which I actually didn't find the name of. He wrote at least 40 short stories for various fiction magazines during his career. It was a relatively short career because he was born in 1925. He died in 1966 at the age of 40. So,
wow.
Yeah, not a lot about him. There is some question to exactly how many, especially of his short stories, he actually wrote, because his stories continued to come out into the early 70s. It's possible that his agent or something was writing under his name at that point.
Aha.
Yeah, not a lot of information on Robert Alter, but Carny Kill is one that he did write, and that's what we're looking at today. So, where this takes place, we're in an age when sort of the town-to-town carnival is sort of dying, and in part because places like Disneyland, Disney World, the more permanent theme park are opening up, and that's where this takes place. It takes place down in Florida at sort of a lower budget Disney World that has opened up, and it is being staffed by former carnival workers. What could go wrong?
Oh yeah, it's already creeping me out.
Yes. So our main character here is a man called Thaxton, or Thax to his friends. And he's one such carny who's been put out of business for various, and somewhat questionable reasons up north. He's been sent down to Florida to this show where he finds out that the owner of this particular park is a former carnival worker turned businessman who has sort of a soft spot for the down and out carny. He heads to the park pretty much right away. The owner, Rob Cochran, he goes ahead and hires our man Thax. Lo and behold, Mr. Cochran is married to Thax's former partner, Billy. And Billy is she's kind of retired, but she was a carnival performer and a knife thrower. Well, lo and behold, soon after, Cochran turns up dead with one of Billy's knives in his back. Who would have thought that would happen?
Dun, dun, dun.
Yes. So Billy is set up to inherit the money, but she is also a prime suspect in the murder. Obviously, it's her knife. It's in his back. But Thax is also found as a prime suspect. So the investigation goes on, and unlike what probably would happen in real life, where things would get shut down and investigations would continue, no, the show must go on, and the park will remain open while both the police and Thax do their own investigation, running around, talking to the interesting other carnival workers, climbing in and out of various rides at the park, and of course, Thax falls in love with one of the dancers in the park. The ultimate question here is this a forgotten classic? No, it not really. It is a fairly entertaining story, and it might be worth a read if you enjoy, like I do, this sort of dark idea of the carnival or the theme park or whatever. For that, it's enjoyable. The author does do a good job of playing off of sort of a low-budget Disney World, making the rides and characters seem fairly interesting. And, for that, it's enjoyable. There's also a strong Treasure Island theme in here, if that's something that you like. It is a bit predictable as to what happens. And at times it's a slightly disjointed story. There's also certain aspects of the narrative that don't necessarily age all that well. But like a carnival game, it looks fun. It can be entertaining to play, but just don't expect to win the big prize from Carny Kill.
Aw. I want a big plush pink bear to hug.
Well, if you keep spending money, eventually you'll win that bear, Justin. Just give it another try.
Okay, that's a great idea. That's a sort of a life goal.
Yes, but Carny Kill, it's a short read, and it can be found very cheaply as a used copy. So, it might be worth a few hours of your time.
Cool. Thanks for sharing, Kurt.
Last up in this episode, we have a short biography of Layton Gage.
Yeah, who the hell is this guy?
Good question. Who the hell is Layton Gage? That's probably maybe what we should start calling this biography segment.
Who the hell is
Layton Gage? Well, Leighton Gage is an author who got into the writing game rather late in life. He is now dead, unfortunately for him. He was born on May 13th, 1942 in New Jersey. He died on July 26, 2013 at the age of 71 in Miami, Florida from pancreatic cancer.
Aye.
Yeah, not a good way to go. He was married twice in 1980, and this is somewhat important to our narrative or our story, Blood of the Wicked. He married a woman named Edie Pusuo de Brito. I'm sure I slayed that, but that was his wife, who was a native Brazilian. He moved to Brazil prior to that, actually. He lived in Brazil for at least 20 years. He also had 4 daughters from 2 different marriages, and he spent most of his life working as an international creative director for an ad agency. He won a lot of awards as a creator of various ads, 120 some art awards. He must have been considered fairly decent artist and not just sort of like a executive of an ad agency or something. He was on the one of the film juries at the prestigious film festival in Cannes.
Oh,
yeah, he was a member of the Art Directors Club of New York.
He's a regular Don Draper.
I guess so. He wrote at least one book of film criticism that was published in Portuguese, is, I guess, considered and still used as a textbook for film studies, if you are studying that in the Portuguese language. He did live as part of his career quite globally. He lived in Germany, the US, the Netherlands, Australia, Argentina, and for a long time was spending at least half of the year in Brazil. And he lived in a smaller town just outside of Sao Paulo, starting in, I guess, 1973. He didn't publish his first book until 2008 at the age of 66. Other than his film criticism, this series, the Chief Inspector Mario Silva investigations, that's what he wrote. There are 7 titles that he was able to crank out in that relatively short period of time before he died. Interestingly, these titles have never been translated into Portuguese. Written in English, they've been translated into French, Italian, Finnish, and Dutch, and they do cover some, all of them cover some rather difficult topics, such as this land movement in the book that we covered. They cover things like tribal genocide, organ theft, human trafficking, and the like. So some pretty important topics and fairly deep topics. But there's not a ton of information on Leighton Gage. I couldn't even really find a biography that said, like, where did he go to school for to learn his layout or whatever it was for the ad agency. I don't know. There's no information on that I could find online. I did watch a couple of pretty short interviews with him. One of the things that he did stress in a lot of his interviews, and one of the things that he wanted to get through with these books, was to give particularly American authors, since he was born an American, a better understanding of Brazil, because he felt that a lot of people just view Brazil as sort of the beach and the rainforest and think of it as a poor country, when it's really a country of great wealth, but there's a huge socioeconomic divide in Brazil. He's really big on pointing out that, and we didn't quite cover this in our Brazilian Noir topic, but I think it's worth mentioning because he makes such a big deal of this in his interviews. Brazil is the 5th largest country in landmass in the world, and it also has the 5th highest population in the world. And at the time of that interview, that was 208 million people. So it's a huge country, and that's one of the things that he's trying to get through in his fiction, is to share the great diversity and the great scale of the Brazilian country.
I think he does that well. I mean, if this book is any testament to that, I think he does succeed on that count.
Yes, I would agree. The one thing that did make me laugh during one of the interviews that he said here was that they were talking about some of the social commentary and stuff like that, and trying not to be moralistic in his tales. And he says, well, I try and do it subtly. And I had to laugh because I didn't feel that was very subtle in Blood of the Wicked. But
no, I don't think so.
No, he kind of hits it over the head with a hammer.
Yeah.
Well, that's part 1 of our look at Blood of the Wicked. I hope you'll take a look at this book between episodes if you haven't already, and join us for episode 2, where we will get in deep with Blood of the Wicked.
Coming up in future episodes after part 2, we do have one more stop on our noir trip around the world. We're going to go to Mexico City for episodes 40 and 41 and spend time with Ignacio Paco Taibo's Hector Beliscorin Shane novel. This is the second one in this detective series. It's called An Easy Thing. So if you haven't purchased that one already, go out and grab it. It should be a fun read. It's a good series, and we look forward to that. And then we land back in the United States, U.S. soil, and we're going to dive into some sci-fi noir to cleanse the palate. We're going to spend time with Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is obviously the setup for the Blade Runner films. So do make time for that one as well. And then we might dive into a little old-fashioned, hard-boiled American noir, some punch-it-up stuff with Richard Stark and The Hunter. And that will be the next 3, let's say 6 episodes. So now you know.
If you want to get in touch with the show, you can find us on Facebook at Point Blank Hardboiled Noir and Detective Fiction. The best way to contact the show if you have a question or a comment is through email, pointblanknoir@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you there. You can also tweet at us at pointblanknoir.
Spread the word. Like the show, give us a rating on iTunes or some other device. Also, tell your friends, and we will see you next time.
See you next time.
Point Blank is under a Creative Commons license. Music is by Justin. Copywritten works are property of their respective holders.